Coming to you from the dining room table at East Barbary Lane, welcome to a special episode of Full Circle, the podcast. Today we will be talking to our dear friend, Pauli Reese. Pauli is the host of Uncommon Good, the podcast. Hey, Pauli. How are you, love?
Hi, ladies. I am so good and so happy to be with y'all today.
You're a lady now, Charles.
I know. I'm honorary.
You're honorary. What up? I feel like it's been a million years.
It has. Back in the old yesteryears of having our early, harsh lockdowns, pandemic homes in Northeast Philly. Can we say that? Are we location safe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, no, because we met at our bar.
That's right.
And we were talking about, pulling together some comedy stuff and
That's right.
all of that. And then, the world changed.
The halcyon days before the Ides of March 2020.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those marches did Ide or whatever.
It's been, and I'm sure we're going to get into this, it's been such a clarifying experience. And, that is not true just for us. That's so many folks and absolutely so many trans folks, when you close everything and you just have us sit with ourselves and think, I feel like there's been just so much transformation, so much, this sky isn't going to get any bluer, and here I am, and it's got to be a new day. And I think we're still figuring out what the new day looks like, but
we're kind of building it from the ground up.
We are. But
That's
certainly, since last we talked, I think everything has changed for all of us. So,
Absolutely.
we're in New Jersey now, of all places.
We're Jersey girls.
We're Jersey girls, yeah.
So the relevant question for your Jersey listeners is it called Taylor ham or is it called pork roll?
It's pork roll down here.
Yeah.
Taylor ham is a North Jersey thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's always been pork roll in South Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Like Philadelphia.
I have no stake in this conversation.
Well, yeah, I mean, pretty much South Jersey is an extension of Philadelphia. Pretty much it is. Same sports teams, same general ideology, same, fuck around and find out kind of attitude. It's because we're literally 20 minutes outside of Center City.
The same general hate of Long Island. Yeah.
Yeah, that whole
Yeah.
the whole thing. And Kathy always says no one says it that way.
Except, they do.
Whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
So, so speaking of, when we met, Pauli, we were talking a lot about your connections with the Philadelphia comedy scene and improv scene. How much or little has that changed since the pandemic?
I think the scene is really opening up. At least the broad scene. We're slowly starting to get back to in-person theater. Certainly, as a person who tried to do Zoom comedy and Zoom improv and Zoom music, that sucked. We found ways of doing it that were interesting, but there's nothing like having an audience in front of you. When y'all ladies tape, like when I tape my show, there's nothing like having a live studio audience to get the sense of how people are receiving your content for good or ill. And a live stream gets close, but until we have this sort of that's sort of the actual real metaverse and not the shitty version that. Can I swear on here? Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay.
Oh, fuck yes.
Until we have an actual real internet of things designed for real people and not by a robot. Like we won't have anything close to that, but I think that the comedy scene is very slowly starting to reopen. Certainly shows that I was cast in here over the fall, people are really eager to get back to seeing live theater. And I work mostly in small improv and sketch comedy and on little sort of musical things that have like no budget. And we don't do necessarily improv because like we don't want to do better theater. We just can't afford a dramaturg. But
can't afford to write things down. Got to make it up on the go.
Yeah, exactly.
Pens and paper costs money.
Yep.
That. But for friends who know me locally in Philly, my specialty is doing musical improv. So if you've ever watched Whose Line Is It Anyway and seen the musical song games where Wayne Brady and his friends make up a song on the spot, my specialty is being the pianist who helps create those songs.
Nice.
and
Fun.
creating bands that do that. I work for 2 shows in town. I work for Comedy Sports.
Yes.
Shout out to Comedy Sports Philly. They're
Awesome.
and the Adrian Theater on Sansom Street in Rittenhouse Square, and
Love
also
that space.
yeah, it's amazing. There's so much history there, like especially around the Barrymores.
I've performed there.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Black Box is back, baby. And then so I'm directing a show for them, a new musical improv show, like an improvised Christopher Guest documentary, like in the space of like A Mighty Wind and Spinal Tap, but it'll all be 100% improvised. That goes up in May, and then I work for a company, a troupe here in town called Thank You Places, and they do a live improvised like Broadway style musical over the course of an hour. So very pleased to be doing those things here in town. While I was in lockdown, the real big musical improv experience that I had is I worked for one of Lin-Manuel Miranda's companies called Freestyle Love Supreme Academy.
Yes.
Yeah, they. I was in their last set of in-person classes that ran January to March in 2020. And they canceled our last class because of lockdowns. The right thing to do. But the stage performing show of that company, Freestyle Love Supreme, just recently completed a touring run. They were actually in Philadelphia back in June, and now a bunch of my friends who are still involved with the stage show are involved in the Vegas residency. They're up at the Venetian right now. So
That's right. They
Go see
are
them.
doing
Yeah.
Vegas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. So, how did your comedy improv? Where are your roots in that? Like, how'd you get started with that?
Oh, baby, it was watching Saturday Night Live, staying up way past my bedtime, and like in the late '80s. Like I'm the sort of like Jan Hooks and Phil Hartman and Ellen Cleghorn era.
The golden age.
Yeah, right.
One of them.
A golden age.
One of them.
Like
Some of us remember Belushi in real time.
Well, yeah.
You know, like I go back that far.
I wish I had thank you Peacock and also come sponsor our shows.
Right.
But one of my past guests is writes and is the on-camera talent for one of their shows, and so please come pick us up, Daddy Peacock.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
But there's just something special about that, and the kids in the hall, and like
Oh yeah.
before Black Sketch Comedy got on the airwaves, you know, there was like Showtime at the Apollo, and there was
Oh yeah.
like all of the non-white stand-up specials that HBO was starting to take chances on. Like those like growing up with white parents were kind of like my like I look more like these people than I do like the people who serve me cereal in the morning. Like I should lean into that.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear of Pomo Afro Homos?
No, I don't know this.
Oh, wow. They're a group. I discovered them. There was this gay comedy special on Comedy Channel. And, you know, I had just come out, so I was all about, something gay on television. And they were like a sketch troupe. And they were wild. And then come to find out, like, they were a thing. I haven't heard much from them, but their stuff is out there. Look them up. Pomo Afro Homos.
Pomo.
Yes.
Afro.
As in postmodern.
Homos.
I love that.
I love that you think I didn't know what Pomo was.
We have people that might not have.
Well,
known
no,
that.
I appreciate the clarification, but I actually got that one. And
Oh
I
no,
know what-
totally. Like whenever
I know from homos.
like half of my guests, like on my show, like I try and pull people from as many different disciplines as possible and have them talk about what their concept of making the world, or at least their neighborhood or themselves, a better place is. So 90% of success in my show is doing the research and then getting people to slow down and explain like jargon terms, like, and so I just had a guest on who was talking about like the history of Christmas and Christianity poaching that tradition from paganism, and I had to slow down and be like, you need to tell people what systematic theology is and like what all of these things around like theology of the Trinity, because like we all know like the Rick Warrens and the Jerry Falwells of the world, and like we know how awful their impact on the world has been, like their public life, and in terms of the net negative, I would say the net negative impact in terms of the social good and how they influence other people, but like tracing back to the roots of like why we do the things that we do. So in that realm, we had an ultra marathon runner on, and we had to define terms there. We had the CEO of Patco and the Delaware River Port Authority on, and it's like, what does it mean? Like, what does public trust mean? How do you what does public service and servant leadership look like? So 90%, just what does POMO mean? I didn't have it, so I'm grateful for the explanation. Yeah.
See.
So let you mentioned Falwell et al. You actually have a Master's of Divinity,
That's true.
and that is from Yale.
That's true.
So I just want to put that out there as, you know, a qualification. How important is spirituality to you these days?
Yeah.
How much does it inform what you're doing, just in terms of not just creativity, but, you know, life?
That's a really good question. I'll position Yale by saying Ivy League, which is just like political correctness for old and white and lots of money built on the backs of bodies of color, and particularly black slaves.
Say it. Say it.
Yeah. It should be noted also that land is the unceded land of the Quinnipiac people. Just as now, where I'm taping in Southwest Philadelphia, I sit on the unceded land of the Lenni Lenape tribe and the historic Black Bottom community. But with Yale is thankfully, I think thankfully known as the Gay Ivy, in so much as like all of the colloquially, like a lot of the most progressive people who will attend an Ivy League institution will probably attend Yale or Harvard. The challenges of that mean is that it has a lot of the fake allyship neoliberalism there,
Right.
but also there's the same sort of potential, like to make all of those incredible connections and find like-minded people who can help you find the resources to do your work. So there's the context for my actual answer. Spirituality is really important. Spirituality is really important to me because for me that language means all of the unanswerable questions. Like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live a good life? What do we owe each other as fellow humans? What is our relationship to a planet which we are slowly killing? Which we're noticing that now in a time where we probably have a little bit of chance. We probably have a wiggle room of like 10 to 20 years to be able to at least stabilize, if not reverse course.
Right.
And because of that is slowly killing us, right? And all of those other sorts of like divine urges, like why is there suffering in the world? Why do we hate each other over things that really don't matter?
That don't fucking matter, yeah.
And where is our common humanity under all of that? One of my mentors and collaborators who's also been on the show, she's called Hope Hall, among other things. She was the very first ever presidential videographer for the White House, and so she did documentary work for. And thank you all for letting me plug her taping. But
that's amazing.
Yeah. She like talked about like what it was like to help create hope and change with President Obama. Saw the coffee mug, by the way, love it.
Charles White Tears coffee
so
mug.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But like those sorts of questions are the things that drive me, and the answers that I'm seeking. The answer that I'm most interested in right now is more of a question in proper Jeopardy style, and that's, how can we have meaningful and civil conversations with each other so that we can stop hurting each other? Because it's a lot harder to hate the person whose story you know.
That is
I think that's very true.
Yeah.
I think that's very true and critically important. You use the word unanswerable, and I like that. You know, one of the things, I've had a lot of theological discussions with a lot of biblical scholars and theologians and clergy.
Yeah.
And my little spiel at the front of it is, we can have any conversation you'd like to, so long as we reserve one corner, right, of our time together to say, and this might all be bullshit. Because I think if we can't say that, if we can't use words like unanswerable or unanswered or as of yet unanswered, if we can't do that, that's where, for me, faith goes awry. Quickly is the certainty, is the declaration. So, you know, you mentioned some names. I'm not going to give them any more air, but, you know, those folks who say, I will lead the flock, and this is the way, and these are the parameters, and whatever exists outside of what I'm telling you is evil.
Right.
And I think that goes to exactly what you're talking about. How can we be civil in that context? Right? So, you know, when the world is black and white, and, you know, I've been down that road in my family, or at least in my extended family, of fundamentalism. And, you know, you can't argue with God. When people have decided they speak for God, you can't argue with God.
Yeah.
They're really... I'm searching for that myself. I am searching for that place where we can have a civil discourse with someone who, you know, their premise is questioning my humanity.
I'll start with just the notion, like when I'm entering that conversation, I'll start with the notion that both of us are humans. We are legally protected as human beings, and we have the same protections as people. If for no other reason, at least in the United States, both of us have a social security number. And even if that's not necessarily true, if we're talking about a person whose life benefits are not necessarily protected by the U.S. government, it's a foundational part of our country's foundational philosophical documents that everyone actually has human dignity. And in, I would say, a solid 90% of spiritualities that I've studied, certainly in the Abrahamic faiths and their offshoots, Judaism, Christianity, the Nation of Islam, human dignity is everywhere. Human dignity and universal positive regard. I was talking to a hospital chaplain who worked at Cedars-Sinai during the heavier parts of the lockdowns, and that this is his term. Universal positive regard is all over almost all spirituality traditions. The common term that they might more regularly use for that is God. And the danger encroaches when we say that the specific way that we convey universal positive regard, meaning human dignity, gives more human dignity to someone else on the basis of any sort of non-negotiable component of identity, or really anything at all. The idea that everyone deserves to be treated like the wonderful thing that they are is exactly as universal as that sort of inkling in the back of all of our heads says that it is. That, for me at least, is the premise of spirituality. That we all deserve, because we exist, and it is somehow written into the languages of the vast majority of contemporary government constitutions where those exist, even in non-democratic societies, but they're just perverted and adulterated in some way, that human beings are important and meaningful, and that the world around us is also important and meaningful. And everything else is just secret sauce and gravy, right?
Right.
Like the friend, like a fresh, like nobody except I guess if you can't get like the Monsanto stuff out of it and you can't get like all of the additives out of it, but nobody hates a good French fry when it's fresh from the fryer. Like human beings are French fries. Like if you salt them a little bit, that makes it perfect. If you add a little bit of gravy and like some cheese curds, that makes it poutine. If you add fake cheese sauce and a little bit of Old Bay, then you can sell them for $20 for a McDonald's small size. Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
Come on,
It's
metaphor.
an interesting way to look at it. You know,
Yeah,
the difference being that French fries don't tend to have anywhere near the infighting. That you're somehow an ineffective or invalid fry as compared to my version of a fry.
Exactly. Because, I like a beer battered fry, I like a crinkle cut fry. I'm never going to turn down any of it.
You like a shoestring fry?
The shoestrings are fun. Yeah, I think they should all have their place. And yet, we have the fries that are convinced they are the only and best fries.
Right.
And
The steakhouse fry.
I guess.
Why can't we just be a nice fry medley?
Right. Well, right. And there's one of those unanswerable questions, I think.
Yeah.
Well, it's when you add all these caveats to the conversation about how we are all, as humans, worthy of existing in a peaceful and dignified manner. And, it's like, where does that come from,
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting? I mean, I think we are having a different conversation right now. All of us acutely aware of what being othered feels like and is in this world, as opposed to folks who have never really experienced that.
I would say yes, I agree. There are some of us for whom being othered is very evident and very clear, because we have. identities that make us the target of othering that are very visually apparent. I would add to that, especially in the work that I've done in faith communities. Faith communities are really good at telling people how not to be othered. And even the people who fit into them really, really well, there are parts like your, I don't know, Joe Q Public who has 1.5 children, is probably married, a white cisgender male who's also married to a white cisgender woman, and they have a dog, white picket fence, like 50s family. They have parts of themselves that are othered, that are the sort of beauty that if we could actually let out, those, I like to call it the squishy, vulnerable parts.
Yes.
If we figured out how to make it safe for those parts of everybody to be as normalized as we are getting the cisgender gay community to, and as we are increasingly certainly at least in the UK, as we are getting disabled and differently abled populations too, I think whatever that work of like tending that hurt inner child that really actually love gymnastics and dance rather than baseball and football, if we figured out how to make safe places for that, we would probably find the ways that even those really hardened lives would be able to stop hurting themselves and stop hurting each other, and frankly stop hurting us. Like, we still need legislation between then to make sure that they can't legally hurt us. That's definitely true. But I'm also interested in that sort of like long game, that deep, like this is very Christian language, that sort of deep soul work. Like a dream of mine would be to walk up to someone like the senior senator from Texas and be like, why do you need to hurt so many other people? Or why do you at least need to vote for policies that hurt so many other people? Just,
it's a fair question.
Yeah, it is.
Like, because clearly, like, that's not making you happy. Because if you just needed to do that, then you've already done that so many times, and you wouldn't need to do that anymore. And you're not dumb. You can see the impact that that's having, or even a certain very like Orange Crush colored former president. Like why? What is it about power and the life that you've lived in the past, how you've been wounded, that makes you need to have such a net negative impact on so many people in the world? Because you can see it. I'm sure he can see it. I'm sure he knows perfectly well.
I think that there's a huge element of P.T. Barnum in the whole construction. The whole thing we keep seeing play out is, feeding fears. Right? Feeding, like, if we can cultivate and feed the fears in the rabble, there's money in it.
Right. Fear is big business.
And we have to, at all costs keep the conflict going.
Right.
Because if they're pointing at each other, they're not pointing at us. And so it's, I don't know, I look at that whole thing as like the Wizard of Oz meets P.T. Barnum, and it's all bullshit behind the curtain, and they don't even believe the things they say.
Right.
Exactly.
The few folks like that, and there are not many in this world who I've actually really sat down and talked to one-on-one, they're not stupid. They're not as dumb as you think they must be, or I assume that they must be to do this stuff. It's what sells. They're like, well, that's not my personal life. It's like, yeah, but the impact is huge.
Right. It's like, well, what's the end game?
The impact is huge. What are you even doing? You know, the word that came into my mind as you were talking about that, as you were talking about cis folk, the word that came into my mind was permission.
I'll use cis folk in scare quotes, incidentally, because we know it's true. But anyway,
well, sure.
Scare quotes.
But is the idea? I think we seek permission. You know, one of the things Charles and I say and do is, just waking up in the morning is an act of resistance.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Just being out here in the world saying, yeah, this is who we are, is an act of resistance. I think that there is an element of example to that, where as much as they're fighting against sort of, the many faceted ways the queer community expresses itself, and I include the trans community, as well.
Yeah.
Part of the fight against us is I've played by these damn rules and you will too. How dare you color outside those lines, especially around gender, especially around, maleness in particular.
Yeah.
And so I like to think that there's an element of example setting we do if they don't kill us first, that will help expand that freedom.
Yeah.
But I don't know that folks even know how to ask for permission. And it feels like the deeper we go down this hole of, things being black and white, and biological determinism and these nonsensical things that, frankly, I lived through in the 1970s and I have no interest in going back to. It's harder and harder for people to say, I was wrong and learn something. Mm-hmm. Like when this whole woke is an accusation,
too.
It's like, I'm sorry, what? What? So education is what? Wait.
Education,
explain
compassion.
This, right. Explain this to me slowly, because I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't get it. You slid in something. I want to visit a little bit. So you are a transnational adoptee. Am I correct?
That's very correct.
Okay. I am learning more. A dear friend and mentor of mine is a Korean transnational, transracial adoptee. Yeah. So, white mom and dad.
Yep. And specifically a mom and a dad. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
His story is not what you've read in the magazines. Lot of trauma, lot of not belonging, lot of questions still, and we're the same age. It hasn't been easy, as successful as he has been otherwise. That's a trauma that really runs deep that folks don't really talk about much. I mean, I'm just starting to understand.
Yeah.
Because, we've sold adoption as some sort of panacea and some wonderful thing, and it's not always how it works. What do you want to talk about your experience at all?
I can. This is one of those sorts of things where I can certainly share a bit of my story. I'll also bring some work in that this is one of the reasons why go to an institution like Yale and endure all of the white money, because then you get to talk with scholars who actually do thinking about these things.
Yeah.
From what we know, I was put up for adoption as a child. I was born in October of 1985, put up for adoption shortly after by a couple of parents in Korea who didn't have the finances to be able, to raise a child. So I was adopted from a halfway house is the language that they use, but we believe functionally that they are just state-funded orphanages.
Right.
there at the time when I was adopted in January of '86. So I essentially have two birthdays, where one could reasonably expect gifts from family, from adoptive parents, is like actual birthday, and then adoption day. Right. So which is really cool, because if you've lost your pair of socks by the end of Christmas, then you have the opportunity to ask for another one.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
But some of the history about it is that after the Korean War, the U.S. was trying to normalize relations with Korea because of its part, which was, in terms of the media, a little bit less universally negative than what the Vietnam War would become. But the idea was we were involved in helping to create the division that would eventually become North and South Korea. So we now have the responsibility to save the noble orphan, again in scare quotes.
Mm.
So the Korean adoptees, there became essentially two organizations, two para-church, very Christianity influenced organizations, one being the Pearl S. Buck Foundation, not the literature arm of that, but the cultural arm of that, and then another one called the Holt Agency, which were responsible for the lobbying of the U.S. government that allowed for effectively the first broadly available international adoptions to take place. These start to happen. These from the 60s onward, and still the adoption of transracial, transnational Korean adoptees continues, albeit at a much lower pace because we know a lot more, and so there becomes this pathway to adoption for presumably parents who couldn't have children. That was a part of the adoption application process, proving medically to the agency that you had made good faith efforts to start a family on your own, but were otherwise unsuccessful.
So that I'm just going to say that must have been added later as a condition, because this would have been the late 60s where my friend was concerned, and there were already children in the family.
Yeah. I think that must be right as well. Something to that effect, or at least I'll say, families that have been so far proven to not be able to have children were prioritized in the application process.
Okay,
I'll rephrase sense to that language. But a part of that was a lot of book reading, training about how to be a parent for new parents, how to help assimilate a transnational, transracial adoptee, which essentially is just like whitewashing. If you want them to be successful, then make them as white as possible. So a further bolstering of model minority from vis-a-vis the Chinese Exclusion Act. That series on it was Cinemax before they folded. Warriors did a really good job of like being the prestige series that depicted the impact of the Chinese Exclusion Act and the early Asian immigration in California and San Francisco, etc. Anyway, go check it out. I think HBO Max has rights to it right now, and they're actually talking about, I think, a second season is in post production. Like it was like right before Cinemax closed their new media productions, but Warrior's fantastic. And there's a bunch of otherwise unknown Chinese actors that had that just create incredible performances. At any rate, so for me, like that was my experience of growing up in a culture where it was my responsibility to be as American as possible, which means being white, being Christian, being a good student. It turned me into a people pleaser for most of my life. and also being heteronormative, the language that we now have as heteronormative, and being as masculine a body as this person this person could potentially be, and that's never really been me. Like, I was awful at t-ball. I routinely hit the tee and knocked the tee over, even after they'd given like 3 or 4 slow pitches, and they're like, you can do it. And so eventually, like, what they do is they just have you line up with the bat like behind the ball, almost touching it, and they're like, just swing it back like inches and then hit it. And they would like underthrow the ball to first base so that you could get on for participation points. Anyway.
Wow.
But that shit, Boy Scouts, like community
Boy Scouts.
soccer, and I think the most gender ambiguous a person could be would be to sing in the choir before your voice dropped.
Right.
So all of that, and for me, that took a lot of the look of dissociation and like not really paying attention to like the inner voice that was saying, hey, this doesn't feel normal. Like, there are things that don't feel right about this. You should pay attention to me. And choosing to ignore that because all of the thought speak, all of the whitewashing speak of like being successful, and that success is a thing that a person should want to begin with.
Right. Whatever.
Or the way
means.
that you live a good life, whatever a good life is, and certainly the way that you get to heaven, over all of the other heathens, especially since you're the lucky noble orphan who was saved from a life of squalor. You know.
Yeah.
Wow.
How is the relationship now?
It's surprisingly good. I say surprising because being the trans non-binary, disabled, invisibly disabled, to be fair, Korean person that I am, and divorced, so I have like the unholy trinity of anti-Christian labels. Well, is it the quadrifecta? I think so. But anyway,
yeah, I think it might be.
Whatever. Beyond that, I'm even a number other than 3, which makes even the Christian numerology bad. But interestingly, still really love the teachings of Jesus. But moving on from that, the relationship with my parents is surprisingly good, because as much as I would love to place the blame of the way that I am on my upbringing, I can't, because they weren't parents before me either, and they're a product of the lives that they were raised in. And so by all accounts and effects, assuming that they had my best interest in mind, they were doing, from sources that they were told that they could trust, the best that they thought that they could.
Of course.
So there is the language that they honestly didn't know any better. So a lot of the language, a lot of the work, and my parents are both retired. They're like, we're at the place where we're starting to talk about advanced directives and things in terms of age, to give you a sense. They still live in the giant, like the giant bucolic estate that I was raised in. Not giant, like there were 3 children in that family, two that were natural born children after me. But like very, very beautiful central Pennsylvania, like space among sprawling farmland. And so there is a lot of trying to build a new culture of this is what it's like to have like a TNB person of color child, disabled person of color child, now as an adult, and how do we find love for each other in the bodies that we live in now? I think is the question that I'm constantly asking and renegotiating, and for me that's really important. And I'm happy with the progress that we've made, because we know that we have each other's back, which is more than many can say.
Right.
But the emotional understanding that it takes to make my adoptive parents a part of my chosen family is still
Right.
work that I haven't finished yet.
Sure.
But that's also okay because they don't have
right,
to be.
yeah.
And I don't have to have that expectation of them. And that doesn't have to diminish the love of them that I do get to enjoy.
Okay. That's
Nice.
fair. No, that it feels like a healthy place to be for you.
For me, it is. And that's definitely true that's not the case for everyone. But for me, where I'm at right now, it's fine enough, you know?
Good. Yeah, my friend, once we really started talking about that part of his life, which is fairly recent, he used the term human trafficking. And, for him, that phrase is more accurate than the adoptive experience.
Yeah.
And his story is a little bit different. His mother was Korean. His father was American and a service member who, came back without her and without him. And, he wound up being adopted into a family that was not supportive.
Yeah, Madame Butterfly. That's awful. Ugh.
Yeah. So,
Right, yeah.
and I was like, well, what do you mean human traffic? How, there are rules here. And he's like, really? You think so? Do you know how many of us don't have history? We don't have the right papers. We don't. I mean, he had issues with citizenship because they just didn't finish that process for him. And he could have been sent back to a country he doesn't know.
He didn't know. Yeah.
That could have happened easily. Fortunately, it worked out because he's got a wife and kids. But
right.
so much that I never understood. And,
Yeah.
And how formative that can be, and how but generally folks have no idea. They have no idea what that feels like. Now, have you ever looked for the biological connection, or are you at peace with not knowing that? Where are you with that?
I'm not
in
at
terms of
peace
your
with not
personal
knowing.
history?
That's a really good question. I'm not at peace with not knowing, but I'm in a place where, at least at this stage in my life, it can't be the guiding priority of my life.
Sure.
And the the emotional self-regulation of that feels important. Is a lesson that I've kind of applied across a bunch of other uncomfortable shit in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, that lesson of being okay with uncomfortable feelings, unsatisfying and unresolved tension in my life is, at least for now, what I take from that. Because that feels like something that feels very embodied in my life, in the physical body that I live in my brain space. Like the work of being able to be comfortable with those profoundly uncomfortable feelings feels important, and a very necessary and essential survival mechanism, given the 3 years that we've had so far of this pandemic.
Yeah. I want to talk more about that and many other things. We're going to take a quick break first. Please stay with us, Pauli. It's so good to talk to you. And you look wonderful, by the way.
Why, thank you.
And we will be right back.
What do you get when you combine voice actors, playwrights, and a podcast? Well, you get an ever-growing collection of audio theater full of original works of every genre. You get Bluebird Broadcast. Hi, I'm the host, creator, and producer of Bluebird Broadcast, Milena Karpukhina. Adults need story time too. And with bite-sized radio plays, immerse yourself in a story worth listening to. Whether it be about two men exploring the Alaskan wilderness, a world in which the government imposes arranged marriage for all, or a woman justifying being coerced into murder, you'll find the story for you. Listen to Bluebird Broadcast today, anywhere you get your podcasts.
A Nefarious Nightmare is a true crime podcast focusing on lesser-known crimes and crimes against those deemed extra vulnerable.
Every now and then, we cover more well-known crimes due to the fact that it is relevant or even interesting regarding the cases we cover. And the B is a symbol for all victims as we recognize their strength, resilience, and vulnerability.
So join us. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or just about any podcast platform. Remember, when you mess with the bees,
you get the hive.
And we are back with Pauli Reese.
We're back.
We're back.
There's so much of your journey I want to cover, but I want to start with, we met you as out and proud as non-binary. Talk to me about that journey. When did you come out, and how'd that go?
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. In an environment, I don't have many environments where I get to talk about where I don't have to explain, where I don't have to explain to an ally.
Right.
So this is wonderful. This is another space where at Yale, like one of the things that was really beneficial about this time was at the time I was thinking about sponsored by a particular Christian denomination to become a clergy person. That sponsorship has I've since withdrawn from, but one of the things, like when you're in that sort of pressure cooker environment where you're doing like a full load worth of coursework and all of your extracurriculars, and you're thinking about like personal growth on top of that, you have the opportunity, if you so choose, to do the work of like personal, like self-examination. And that was one of those things that came, that for gender for me, the more that I looked back, because a lot of the work of being being formed to become a clergy person is them finding surreptitious ways of making sure that you're not going to kill anyone, or not going to have an identity that they can't explain in a press conference, or not going to contribute to the epidemic of clergy sex abuse of minors.
Right,
Yeah, that's big.
Like all of that, which to their credit, that last one is really important. But they continue. They're not doing very well in forming new people.
Do you will you name the denomination, or would you prefer not to?
No, I can talk about it. This is all public knowledge. I was sponsored by the Episcopal Church.
Okay.
Like for ordination to the priesthood. And
They're one of the ones I like, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
They actually have queer clergy, and
they do. They're doing their best to try and create space for that, but it's very similar, the way that church works, to the way that queer rights have tended to work in the U.S. government, in that 90% of the queer protection, like the broad umbrella term for all people who, on the basis of identity, sexual identity or gender identity of any kind, makes them non-normative. The same time I begin ending a marriage, I begin questioning whether doing this work as a clergy person is the right way to do to answer some of these same questions, or at least to offer my temporary answer to these same questions of how do we empower all of the broken lives in Philly? How do we disperse all of that power and access and opportunity? So that's what the process of coming out was like. I remember there was a day where I got the opportunity to just introduce my pronouns, and I said they and them instead of my dead pronoun of he and him, and I was just like, oh, this is fine. Like, it doesn't even. There wasn't like a shining moment. There wasn't like a. It wasn't like this really hallowed egg cracking moment. It was just like, oh, this is the way that it's been the whole time, and that's cool. So, yeah.
Huh.
Well, yeah, same. Same. You know, yeah, there wasn't one moment. There was. Actually, there was. When we put my mother in the ground.
Yeah.
And I started going through her jewelry. There was that moment. Like, okay, I'm free. Because I didn't see in my world, you know, the space or place to ever just talk about being trans.
Sure.
You know, my mother had enough of a struggle, you know, with us as a couple, I think. To her credit, not with us, but
yeah.
Otherwise. And, yeah, so it doesn't, I hear you. Now, how'd you take that conversation back to your parents? Along with the divorce and along with, by the way, you know, not this clergy thing. Like, how was that conversation? Did you do it at like Thanksgiving, or did you like?
The clergy thing took a little bit longer to present because I think it was a greater threat to their identity for me to have complicated feelings about Christian leadership than it was to be a non-normative kid, because I was always a non-normative kid. In a very visible way, except it's even more visible in a secondary way. So that was one of these weird things, because I was also like full of the hope of like being in the final year of a grad program and thinking like, Mom and Dad, here's what pronouns are. Here's what they mean to me. My mom has always been a bit of a tomboy, so I had that connection to be able to relate it to. The divorce part also, I think, because it was potentially threatening a sense of their understanding of what a good Christian life is, was harder than the non-binary conversation. And I'll say, like, to their credit, like, I am still a person to my parents. I'm not one of those sorts of non-cisgender people, one of those sorts of people whose parents disowned them. And so I will always have that level of gratitude, of listening and understanding as well. And then my favorite thing is that after I came out to my parents, then a younger sib came out as trans non-binary to them too.
Really?
So like I'm doing such a good job of like infecting the world in like spreading the queer. I am like the trans typhoid Martin. Absolutely I am.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I think that we do. Because of the ways that we take up space, we actually allow space for folks to say, wait a minute. You know, because Charles and I don't know, did a week go by at Sawtown when some dude didn't come out to us?
No, we called ourselves the Straight Boy Whisperers.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of that, you know, don't tell anybody but. Right. It's like, oh, honey, we're going to tell each other. But other than that, you know, you're okay. You're fine. Because they would like... It was always some version of, you know, I really want to talk to you about something, you know, and either like come outside or thankfully the bar is empty or whatever. And, you know, in hushed tones. And I'd be like, okay, cool. And they'd be like looking at me like they expected some other reaction. And I'm like, you know, sweetie, you can't be weird here. You can try.
Yeah.
But you really can't be.
It's like, I'm not going to give you a lipstick stain on your collar when you go home to your spouse. Like that's not what we
Right.
do here. Like, if you were forward thinking, it's like, maybe I'll give you a CD, like a burned CD of Kool and the Gang, and a tiny little party popper that you can play it at home, like before your wife gets home, and in your bathroom, and be like.
Right.
But you don't do the woohoo because that will wake the neighbors, you know.
Exactly.
Right.
And no straight guy would ever do that.
No.
Well, that's just it. Because that is how we combat bullying. We do it with, normalizing the fact that there are queer people in the world, there are trans people in the world. Just as we do with race. And, I very gently try to talk about this, and I don't suggest ever that all of our experiences are the same. But what I do suggest is there's more commonality than I think we like to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so, often when it's, any comparison between race, gender identity, sexual orientation starts with, well, I can't hide the color of my skin. And I'm like, no, I hear you. I hear you. And you are correct that in queer history, those who could hide did.
Yes.
You're right about that. But a lot of us couldn't.
Yes.
And the ones who couldn't are actually the ones who had to stand up and say something. And then folks fell in line behind them. So you're right.
Yeah.
There's not a direct comparison, but the othering feels the same from here. When you take away another person's humanity, the reason doesn't matter so much as the fact. You know what I mean? It's that, well, when the boot is on your neck, it really doesn't matter whose boot it is or what color or brand the boot might be.
Right.
It sort of feels the same.
Yeah, it's so true. At least in the sense of and I'm going to qualify again because I love this. And there are so few environments where you get to have this deep dive of a conversation into peacemaking. But
Right.
I suppose the conversations were similar. We're taping in December, so like COP27 just recently happened, and conversations around like how do we fix the systemic difference in privilege between lower income nations that don't have access to all of the efficiencies that higher income nations have polluted the earth to have and have easier lives as one, blah, 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 right? Not my area of specialty, but like these conversations are being had, thankfully, like in other areas of the world, so we deserve to have them in this area of the world as well. In terms of, for me, the benefit of having those conversations of this is your behavior and this is the quantifiable impact that your behavior is having on the world when you bully someone, when you tell them, even the ones, to go back to my point from earlier, like the whitest people that still have some sort of squishy or vulnerable bit that has been othered, which is not to say that I have patience for white tears. There are other people who do. But to say that those tears,
Charles is toasting you with his mic.
you had the perfect finger placement to where it looked like white ears, and it's like, yes, please listen, white people. You covered the tea.
Right?
You covered the tea perfectly, and so now we'll spill it. Ha! That was a good one. They're getting to that deep part and allowing that part to experience healing is what changes the mind and heart of a person who knows the only way to be able to make themselves feel better is at Schadenfreude, at the misfortune of another person.
Right.
Like that's the level of like deep person impact that I'm interested in building the framework for the next generation of disenfranchised, displaced person to continue to build off of. That language of I can see the hurt in you, and I can see, even though you've buried it so deep, I can see the humanity in you, and I can trust that that's there. You might not want to do it, and I might be the greater fool for, at this time in the world, for wanting to dig into that. But I think for me, like that space, while also riding the uncomfortable balance of still needing the legislation to make sure that people can't legally kill us or legally keep us from getting married. When those sorts of needs are looked after in a very Maslowian way, those basic safety needs are being well looked after in the moments of inspiration are my like special contribution to the world, I think.
Do you find you're less good at small talk these days? Because I got to tell you, it's what you're saying is really resonating with me, because I have a lot of I wind up in the middle of a lot of really heavy conversations.
Right.
In fact, sometimes folks bring me those people.
Yeah.
To have, I mean, it's happened. Charles has watched it. It's like, it's almost like you need Jesus. It's like you need Martha, and then they'll like sit their friend down and say, talk to her, and
Martha, go.
Yeah.
I think in part it is because I'm weary of small talk. Like I want to know you.
Yeah.
I want to know, I grew up among white people. I am paper fucking white. It took me.
Me too. I'm Twinkie.
Time. Huh?
Me too. I'm Twinkie.
There,
Twinkie.
right. It took me time, but I was always curious about the world around me, and I was always curious about other people. And I wasn't really raised with the same levels of prejudice that a lot of the folks around me were raised with.
Yeah.
So my curiosity was okay, and the fact that I gravitated to the people who would accept me, and most often those were people of color. Those were not the white. The white boys were not generally the ones. And but as I get older, I guess, as we spend time, working on what do we focus on this week, in terms of the podcast. And, one of the reasons we started doing it was, we live at this intersection of gender and orientation and race. We live there, and we've always had these conversations at our table.
Absolutely.
Always. Because that's how we've been together for 10 years is continually understanding one another and working to do that. And so bring that to me.
Yeah.
Because man, we need more of it.
Yeah.
We need more real conversation. We need more vulnerability and more.
Come on, real.
Yeah.
Absolute humanity in discussion. And I think personally, sometimes that's why I'm off-putting, because a lot of folks they really are not interested. They don't want to talk about stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, well, we don't have to. I'll be over there. Just like, I don't know. I think I'm less good at small talk.
I mean,
I feel that.
Yeah, for sure. What's yours like, Chuck? Like are you? Do you have less time to suffer fools too?
Oh yeah, and that aversion to small talk. I was just thinking about that, like this past weekend, like in the whole like, hey, how are you?
Yeah.
There's the answer that, I want to give. Then I know there's the answer that you want to hear. And finally, I just go fine and walk away, because otherwise the dam's going to burst.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
So, back when we were all hanging out, you had an apartment around the corner from our bar. And, things were cool, and then things started to really crumble in different ways, and your life fell apart, and you've built it back up in really beautiful ways.
Thank you.
You know,
Thank you.
but that's a story. Right there is a story, because beginning in, when was the fire? Was that 2020?
The fire was like the last weekend of January 2021.
Okay.
I remember I was on. I'd gotten in. I mentioned I got in with one of Lin-Manuel Miranda's companies. I was on a production meeting for a project. An internet music show that was being produced out of New York. They're called. It was like a hip hop competition show. Think like, gosh, what's that VH1 show called? Think Wild and Out, sort of ish.
Oh,
like,
Wild and Out, yeah.
But it was all like on the internet, and definitely not that, because like. Don't sue us, VH1. But no, I was on a production meeting for that, and the fire happens, and so I'm staying from that, and that's a crazy story by itself. In Northeast Philadelphia, where we were all living at the time, there are a lot of row homes, a lot of adjoining walls. My adjoining wall neighbor is a chain smoker. Missed flicking the unextinguished butt into her can, and it falls in the crack between our houses, and the basement catches fire. And my cross yard neighbors are year-round fire pitters, which is like, so when you smell the smoke in a situation like that, you're like, oh, things are fine. They're just fire pitting.
Right.
Like they fire pit all the time, because being out, why be inside when you could be outdoors? Just like, yeah. But then my roommate bursts in the room while I'm in the production meeting, and they're like, Pauli, the house is on fire. We need to get out right now. Also, another fabulous non-binary person of color. So very grateful for them too. The fire department keeps the fire contained to the basement. But one of the things that they don't tell you is that all of the smoke and the water damage that filters up through the rest of the house makes it, at least to code, uninhabitable until major renovations are completed. So my owner, landlord, roommate, their homeowner's insurance covers an Airbnb for us to stay while the house is being fixed. At the time, like I'm thinking like, great. The Airbnb that they find is in Chinatown, so I'm great. Like it's like great. We can't like go, like nothing is still not open because it's the height of the Delta variant in late January, early February 2021. But I live in a very walkable neighborhood. I'll have my best like not so young adult bohemian life walking around Chinatown. I was starting to get into digital photography at the time. So like I'll just take photos, I'll journal, I'll continue producing like all of these internet shows and things, and like I'll ride out my Delta variant winter pandemic here, and like the notion of a widely available vaccination was very promising, and I was doing a lot of volunteering at the time, looking after the chronically unsheltered people that live in the sort of Parkway area, the Ben Franklin Parkway, the Museum District area, and the City Hall District area. So there was a reasonable expectation that like I might be on one of those essential workers lists of first to get a vaccination. So it was like, great. So like I'll just live my boring, small, displaced, but not technically unsheltered life.
Right.
But then on one...
Sounds almost romantic.
Almost, right?
Right.
But in every proper Hallmark movie, there's always a MacGuffin, a proper inciting incident beyond the actual the initial inciting incident that wrinkles the story. And my wrinkle was in what was it? February 7th of 2021. I'm doing like my work of with one of these great organizations. They're called the Welcome Church. They've been on my podcast talking about doing the foundational advocacy for tiny housing and how to take movements like the Parkway encampments and actually make them lead to lasting legislative change, because that seems to be the way that you get things done. That you write policy around a movement to help preserve the spirit of it, even if that policy doesn't necessarily involve a lot of the temporary community organizers who were there, because a lot of them were students who have since gone on to do other things, and that's their career of like being. And that's what they do, is that they want to be the people in the ground who are raising their voices, amplifying these stories, so then the people who can write policy and do that well, and that's their gift, can be effective in doing their part of the work, right? So, so I'm out with them doing the fancy theology term for this is mendicant, doing work like if you've ever heard of like the Franciscan friars who take vows of poverty to be able to look after the sick person, the unsheltered person, the person in prison, the person who is alone, like that sort of work. So like we're looking, we're actually like out in the snow with the people who live year-round on the Ben Franklin Parkway, making sure that they have tarps to keep their things dry, that they have clean socks and stuff and whatnot. So we go home. So I go home in scare quotes to the Airbnb, but instead of waking up at home, I wake up in the hospital to an ICU nurse saying, using, and also because hospitals are not trans safe spaces, using my dead legal name, Paul, you're in Jefferson Hospital. You were hit by a zip car while riding your bicycle across 11th Street. Please don't freak out. But you're under so much sedation that you can't, but like in your mind, like they can like you know that your mind is. And for a lot of people, like that instant panic version that you see a lot of people doing is not the first thing that happens. Most people, like it. What I learned is it takes the brain a few more moments to gather what's happened before they start to like have the crazy like let me out of here, like the pulling out the IVs and stuff reaction. It takes longer than how Hollywood depicts it. So that's the next upending of my life that you're talking about. That's what. So I'm there for 10 days, undergoing countless hours. By the time it's all said and done, probably somewhere in the range of 40 to 48. Although what we know of, probably somewhere around 32 to 36 hours of life-saving surgery before I wake up to fix like punctured internal organs and to get me stabilized and to input a bunch of metal in my body that's gonna replace the ribs and clavicle that are shattered. So that's the other way that my life has been upended. I was very lucky that I was
bionic NB. That's you, right?
Exactly. They need to write. They need to do another reboot. The $6 million person.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like I was just like every other starving like theater artist, dreamer. That like I was broke and unemployed and doing what work I could on the internet. So like, you know, like I didn't have health care besides Medicaid. So it's like. Literally, actually, the governmental $6 million person. Well, probably not that much because I mean, hospital pricing and all of that. Thank you, John Oliver, for helping us understand that. But like, just like being like my, and in a time where I was already poor, having suddenly being put in a place where, at least for the foreseeable future at the time, what foreseeable future I could see then, that I couldn't do the work that what little work I could do.
Right.
So when you're at the very bottom, like that, where you don't know if you're going to be able to walk again, be able to conduct a choir again, be able to sing or be on stage again. Like, the only thing you have a couple of options, and they mostly revolve around what sort of internal work you're going to do. Are you going to resent it? Are you going to define your life by the timeline that no longer exists and the sort of person that you could have been, or what you see? Thank you, community. What you see yourself living in as the supposed darkest timeline. You can make that the least dark that you can. You might not be able to do that physically, but you can do your best to create the safest and most sustainable brain space and like spiritual space for yourself that you can.
Right.
And because I was very lucky to have good therapy and a lot of friends in the comedy and the New York hip hop scene who rallied around me, I got lucky. I got lucky to have the community, like to have like my tribe to rally around and say, like, we're going to help you figure out how to get bills paid and afford therapy and have the space that you need for your body to heal, so then that your brain can heal and your emotional center can heal and your spiritual core can heal. And all of that continues to be ongoing. We're now almost 2 years on that time, and like I'm still continuing to heal from that process, because that things like that are daily processes of healing. But here we are in, gosh, it's December of 2022.
Right.
Like just under a week from Christmas, and I'm well enough to be able to tape a podcast with y'all fine queens today.
I love
Hallelujah.
that.
And that is enough, because one of the things, like when you deal with chronic pain and fatigue and long-term disability and the possibility and the very real possibility that your independent life is probably 10 to 20 years shorter than what it used to be, is that you have to live a life that's not bitter and cynical. You have to find ways of enjoying small moments of gratitude. And so for me, a day that this is what was it? There's a line from an awful Kevin Kline movie, The Emperor's Club. He goes like, days that begin with rowing on the lake are better than days that do not. Well, the one thing that I know is that days that begin with gratitude are better than days that do not. And
Indeed.
and that's always a good place to be, and a good orientation to begin from.
Beautiful.
What's been the, if I asked you to name a gift out of being T-boned by a car, what's the gift?
That's a good question, and I understand why you phrase it in the conditional. The gift of that is being given the opportunity to do the inner work and to ask myself what really matters. Like at the core missional priorities, values level. In some of the spiritual environments I would have been raised, would be what is important at the spirit and heart level, right?
Okay.
Whatever the center of the non, like the unanswerable, wherever the unanswerable questions live in one's ontology, that what's important at that level.
Yeah.
And then to ask, what of the things that you are doing before you got to this point of reckoning are actually helping you get there and are actually helping you do those things to live into those values and principles. And what are chaff? What are what are the weeds? What are the things that are unimportant and can be burned away? And the next question after that is, if all of those things are true, that you know what your values are, that you know what is helping you get there and what's not, at a very detached, sort of almost like business entrepreneurial level, how do you do more of the things that help you and do less of the things that don't? Perhaps do as few as possible, if any, if like they're not things that are life essentials. And so all of the choices that I've made, as much as I can and with as much emotional awareness as I can, have been motivated by that. Like, what are my values? What are the things that are important to me? And how do I, to use another friend's phrase, how do I go towards that good and away from all of the things that I have been told are good, told by work, parents, friends, spiritual leaders, the 24-hour news cycle, all that.
Yes.
Like, what is actually good to me? And occasionally, like, some of those things might be a part of that good. That's a perfectly reasonable potential outcome. That there might be times where I need any of those things: work, family, the news cycle, to help me understand, like, and who knows? Maybe religion for some, if that's something if that structure is important. But to stop assuming that all of those structures are as important as they say that they are themselves, and to make my own decisions about those things as best I can.
Okay.
For the person that I am today, as opposed to the person that I was in January of 2021, or the person that I would be if, like, February 7th wasn't a thing.
Right, yeah.
Clearly, community was a big part
Yeah.
of this journey. How important was humor?
Oh boy, so important. I mean, like, that's why one of the things that came back after getting back on the bicycle, because I still ride a solid, like, 5-10 miles.
Oh my
a
God,
day.
God bless you. I don't know that I would. Like, I broke my knee.
Yeah.
Rollerblading. I don't. 25 years ago, I haven't been back.
Yeah.
Nope.
No. Well, I was lucky that I blacked out, so I don't actually remember the circumstances of the accident. So I don't have that. I don't have that
Good.
that
There's no imprint.
that imprint to be traumatized by.
That's good.
I've even gone back to the I don't remember any of it. So I've even gone back to, like, the intersection. Some of the work around trauma talks about reintegration of a person's of a person's traumatic experiences. Also, not a therapist, and spiritually informed, trauma-informed spiritual care is not a replacement for therapy. But one of the things that we talk about when we do this work, when people's trauma are informed by spiritual circumstances, which is another one of my helping wedges, the ways that I try and put good out into the world, is that trauma causes a fracture of the brain and the emotions and language, and the work of recovery has to do with the reintegration of all of those pieces, and to create a new narrative around that. So I went to the intersection where I was allegedly the accident happened, and I just didn't feel anything because I didn't remember it. So, like, I'm very grateful for that. But to go back to comedy, like, the ability to do all of this really heavy work while also still taking yourself not too seriously, and understanding one's place and how all of it, even the work that I do, is still bullshit to someone else, is really important. Like the best comics that I look up to, who I can see through like how their work may disparage me, I look up to because they themselves know that they ain't shit. And there will come a comic after them who will be even better than them. Yes, right. there are the notables currently in the news who are far too self-important, and that self-importance is why they are constantly staying in the news, because that's their flaw. They feel like they need to be in the news.
Funny.
And it's not.
Yeah, it's not funny. It's like, sorry, but
like, why would you hold your meaningful, like, charitable contribution to your local Southern Ohio community municipal, like, arts organization captive to the number of viewers you get, or however your listenership is going to make you seem less transphobic than you actually are? Like, like, why are you so self-important that you are impacting so many people in such a net negative way? Like, I mean, like, like you don't hear Wanda Sykes making the same stink about and also don't at me, Wanda Sykes lovers. Like, please don't get in the comments. But like, you don't hear Wanda Sykes like holding her charitable contributions to the media, the media Pennsylvania city council hostage because of whatever burning heart thing that she has, because she knows that she ain't shit. Like. And we'll be the first one to tell you. Yeah. Like all of those things, like good, like even the best gigs end. Like 2016, like happened.
Yes, it did.
But now, like. But it's okay, because he went on to start a media company and like made a third act for like the Adam Ruins Everything show, like, and like found his own ways of continuing to poke fun at the system. God, that was still the best episode of the Colbert Report, like where like he just went and roasted himself, and like that was and anyway, but like I suspect Obama like knows he ain't shit. I suspect. I suspect.
Well, Michelle will tell him.
Yeah.
Shoo.
Yeah, I want to talk about Uncommon Good.
Okay.
Get out of my head, lady. That's where I was going.
I really do. I think it's such an interesting and wonderful progression. And tell us first the premise of the podcast.
Sure. So. The premise of the podcast, my guests are people who, regardless of what stage of their career they're in, what their area of specialty is, regardless of where they sit in any sense of political spectrum, yes, even y'all aforementioned awful, like, people taking their pain out on others, where anyone whose work, at least they say, and also where the language of the work has a measurable net positive contribution to their sphere of influence. I want to talk to you. I want to hear your story. I want to know what sorts of things like help you keep up the wellspring of hope and help you keep going in like the dark moments. I want to know a little about that person's impact and legacy. So those are our topics. Origin story, strategies for hope and recovery, and then impact and legacy. The show came about because I was looking for a way, while I was negotiating my exit from the clergy ordination process to start doing the work that like felt like my heart work of my way of putting good out into the world, of like helping people to have these conversations and to helping us find like our common humanity in that. And the reason that I needed to leave clergy ordination for that was because I had lived for so long thinking that the way that I had the most access to be able to do that was through faith-based organizations, because I grew up in conservative evangelical Christianity. And in that world, faith-based organizations, specifically Christian faith-based organizations, and specifically only Protestant, not Orthodox or Catholic Christian faith-based organizations are the ones that are most able to do that are able to make the commitment to social good and all of that stuff. Like that was a childhood truth that I grew up with, but continued to fall apart when I kept having to ask permission to create those spaces of finding common humanity. And when all these provisions about, well, it has to not just be about the teachings of Jesus, but it has to exclude wisdom from other traditions where that might not be the language that they'd use, or it might have to look a specific way, or you can only publicly look after these trans people or these people of color because they fit in the lens. Like their expression of queer identity fits. Their expression of disabled identity fits. Their expression of poverty fits.
Right. They're not the inconvenient ones.
Yeah.
They make good press.
Right.
Exactly. And so the more inconvenient that I became, the more that it became apparent that a parting of ways was necessary. And also in a very real sense, like organized religion is going through like a real reckoning right now. Like the history cycles, like at least in terms of Christian tradition is what I can speak of, but what my clergy colleagues in other Abrahamic faith traditions tell me the same is also true. For Christian traditions, we're coming up on we're just around like the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. Mm-hmm. So the notion of the entire upending of systems of religious power is actually not only not groundbreaking, but it's actually to be expected.
Sure.
Which. Sure, whatever. I suppose for historians who know the long view, great. For people whose lives are being upended, and for people who are doing things like for people who are dying of suicide because the church told them that it's not okay for them to be who they are, like
which is happening. Yep.
Which still happens. We all have friends who have died, and not just of queer identity, but who were told that it's okay to, who were told by their clergy that it was okay to inject bleach because the president said that they could, or to use the tablets that they used to clean their aquariums as medicine.
Wow.
Well, right. Hideous.
So the idea became, and again, like through all of this like personal reflection of like what's really important. And what am I uniquely capable of doing is like I'm a fair interviewer. I'm a good journalist. I have the tech capacity to solopreneur a podcast right now. And I'm at a place in terms of my physical recovery where I can't work full time yet, so might as well do this. And maybe I don't know. Maybe it won't be like maybe I'll get to a place where I can work full time and like I'll be well enough to do that. Maybe I won't. Who knows? But the work of the podcast is just really, it's really to those of my friends who are ministry minded, who are faith-based community minded. It's actually a church plant disguised as a media company, because the idea behind like a good alternative church plant is, let's drop all of the language that keeps people from being in healthy, self-sustainable, mutually beneficial community, and let's find the actual things that are really important in terms of building generative community, and do that, and do it in the way that is right for right now. And that's what the podcast is, because people, at least for me, are more polarized than they've ever been, are more traumatized by certainly by COVID, unilaterally, but I suspect by a bunch of other things that have not been looked after than they've ever been. And we're at a place where our systems can't really support that. Therapy is, like, in spite of apps like BetterHelp, therapy is no more affordable or emotionally well positioned to the people who really need it the most, who are creating the most substantial net negative impact, like on our communities and on our bodies. But people want to be in communities together, but faith communities are not the places that they're going. Right. So what are the communities that people are participating in? Well, they're very happy to create safe homes for themselves. They're very happy to start having families back. They're very happy to start trying to figure out how to gather together again. And in the safety of those spaces where people feel safe, let's give them the opportunities to have these conversations about what is my good, even though I've been told that my good is less important by the world. But my good is still important to me, and my impact is still important. So the idea behind Uncommon Good is, let's gather together a bunch of people who are trying to put that good out in the world, but it just doesn't look the way that we're used to being told that it should. That the language and the packaging that they use and the framing to put their good out into the world is very, very good. And let's figure out how to translate that, how to frame that across disciplines, so that we can maybe all see that we're, again, going back to our common humanity, not as different as we'd like to think that we are, or at least that we're being told that we are.
That part. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting to me because I know a lot of queer people who really grew up in the church, in the various churches.
Yeah.
And really drew a lot of their identity and their strength from those teachings and from that community, only to find out that if they couldn't fundamentally change who they were, there was no place for them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of trauma in the queer community around religion and spirituality.
Yeah.
And yet the most spiritual people I know are queer and trans people.
Yeah.
And perhaps because, you know, maybe we are the truest representatives of whatever it is God is in the ways that we dance with the masculine and the feminine. Because I have to believe God does. You know, God in my head is Maya Angelou, not Morgan Freeman. You know, if I hear God speaking, it's Maya. But you know, so I think it's vitally important. I think you're approaching some really, really important questions, because there's hunger out there to have that sense of community and belonging, and common ground. You know, that religion, some denominations are beginning to catch up and beginning to make space for us and beginning to challenge their theology. Many are not, and many are doubling and tripling down. So, couldn't be. I don't think there could be a more critical time for it. You know, for what you're doing and the ways that you're doing it, and to say, you know, what can we find here?
Yeah.
It matters. it matters. And, I think at the end of the day, what we're all trying to do is keep our folks alive and
Yes,
get them toward thriving, and get them toward knowing that, they too can make a difference. And we do what we can do. We don't have to do all of the things.
We can't do all of the things.
We can't do all of the things, but I love that, the hell year that 2021 was for you into 2022. It's not an all or nothing proposition, because we need you. We need your voice, and we need your way of seeing this world. It's important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add besides the awkward pause of just saying to like hide the Asian glow. I'm shrinking behind my pop filter right now, listeners, so that people can't see like how blush I am. I'm gonna change the color temperature on my lighting so that it blurs it out a little bit. Oh no, the aperture, the autofocus of the aperture is messing up my image. No. Thank you.
Thank you. I picked up a new term today that I love
that.
so much better. Golden people.
Thank you. I was going to bring that up.
I have now adapted that.
Yes, I had never heard that before. I was like, I love that.
I love it.
So that comes from a friend of mine. Again, this is not mine. But I'm really
It's all
good at
recycled,
stealing
honey.
from my
It's all
my
recycled.
colleagues. No, but there's someone in my cycle in like my circles who has really gone out of their way to use this language. It's a music educator up in the PS world in New York. I should really remember her. I don't remember which school she is, but her name is Alice Soy. That last name spelled TSUI. An awesome follow on Instagram. But she's currently nominated for a music educator Grammy. At the like she's not like full nominated, but she's like made it through multiple rounds of shortlisting or something like
Considered to be considered.
that. Yeah. And she did the unenviable work of trying to ask the question of where non-Black, non-Indigenous people of color fit into the term of BIPOC. And like at a time where it was almost nearly career suicide to do that. I mean, like, not really, because she's a music educator and she's brilliant. But like, I met her through through Freestyle Love Supreme Academy, now FLS Plus, also a great follow. She's gone out of her way to figure out how to deal with the problem of the erasure of East Asian bodies in the media landscape.
Excellent.
And so, and certainly in the educational space, with how little, how few resources that there are for educators to look to, to look after those populations of burgeoning students too.
Nice.
I love it. We have a new term.
Yep. It's going right up there next to LGBTQ.
Yes, LGBTQ.
But her abbreviation for people of color, she uses BBIA. She says Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian.
Okay.
And specifically loving the golden component because of some of the challenges around using the term brown to refer to the many shades of pigmentation and skin tone for people who trace ancestry to the continent of Asia.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay.
I love
it. I love it.
I've enjoyed this time so much. It's so good
So
to catch
have
up
I.
with you.
Thank
and
you.
see your beautiful face and share words and time around our table. Thank you for doing that.
Thanks, y'all. I'm so grateful
Absolutely.
to be here too.
So we will link to your podcast,
Yes.
etc. in the notes of this episode.
Indeed.
And Pauli, Reese, you're amazing. Keep doing it. Keep going, baby.
Charles and Martha, y'all are incredible too. And keep going, keep going, keep going.
We'll do our best.
And I want to thank everyone listening for joining our Love Fest. I am Martha Madrigal.
And I am Charles Tyson Jr.
And you've been listening to Full Circle, the podcast. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Full Circle is a Never Scared Productions podcast, hosted by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal, produced and edited by Never Scared, executive produced by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal. Our theme and music is by the Jingleberries. All names, pictures, audio, and video clips are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective copyright holders.